You've landed on planet 412. In today's episode, we're going to go and explore eyewitness encounters in West Virginia. Enjoy. It was early in 1977 in Monongalia County, West Virginia. I lived with my parents and brother on a small farm that bordered the Cheat River Gorge. We had horses, cattle, chickens, and pigs. The property was fenced in, but we allowed our animals to roam free during daylight hours. We had been having some trouble with coyotes for several months before this incident occurred. They would come up from the river at night and try to get into the chicken coop or go after one of our calves or foals. The evening started out like any other late winter or early spring day that year. My dad went out to do his chores around dusk as usual, while my mom cooked dinner inside the house. I remember it being very overcast because there were no stars visible when I looked outside later on that night. There was a lot of snow on the ground, so it wasn't hard for me to see what happened next. My dad came running back into the house just as we sat down at the table. He told us all to stay inside until he got back from checking something out. When he returned about an hour later, he looked visibly shaken. As soon as he walked through the door, my mother asked him what happened. "I don't know how else to explain this," Dad said quietly, "but we have bigger problems than those damn coyotes." "What are you talking about?" Mom replied nervously. My father then began telling us about what happened while tending his livestock earlier. It was getting dark by now, but there was still enough light coming through clouds overhead, so Dad could make things out pretty well. Across our field is another farm owned by friends of ours named Davis. They raise beef cattle and hay. Dad noticed movement near their barn where they kept their cows. This surprised him since Mr. Davis usually didn't feed them until morning time. Not wanting anything bad happening to his friend's stock, Dad decided he'd better investigate further. Just then, something large and dark stepped out from behind the barn. It stood upright on two legs like a man, but was covered in hair. It had glowing red eyes that were about as high off the ground as my dad's own eyes were. The creature stared at him for a moment before turning around and walking back into the darkness. "I ran over to see if I could find any tracks or something," Dad continued, "but there wasn't anything. It was almost like it just appeared out of nowhere, stood there looking at me, and then vanished." "Are you sure it wasn't some kind of prank?" Mom asked worriedly. "No, I'm not," he replied with conviction. "Whatever this thing is, it's real, and it's dangerous. I don't know what else to do except go get my rifle and keep watch tonight. If we're lucky, maybe whatever it is will stay away from us until morning light when I can get help." "You think we should call someone?" she said nervously. My father paused for a moment before answering. "No," he finally said firmly. "Not yet anyway. I want to be absolutely certain about what we're dealing with here first. We don't need people thinking we've gone crazy either. So let's just wait and see how things play out tonight. Then tomorrow I'll decide whether or not to contact authorities if necessary." After dinner, my brother went upstairs while Mom stayed downstairs doing dishes. Dad sat down in his recliner next to the wood stove where he kept an eye on the outside through the window above the sink. He didn't say much during that time except that everything seemed quiet enough now. Mom came upstairs later on once she finished cleaning up the kitchen. After taking a shower, she put on pajamas and laid in bed reading a book. By this point, it must have been close to midnight because the sky had cleared somewhat, allowing the stars to shine brightly overhead. There was still a lot of snow on the ground, which made everything even brighter. As far as we knew, everything was fine, so I tried to sleep myself. About 1:30 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of our dogs barking outside. This wasn't unusual since they often did this when coyotes were around. I could hear them growling and howling at something, which made me very nervous. As quietly as possible, I got out of bed and went over to the window so I could see what was going on. There was just enough light coming from a street lamp across the road for me to make out the shape of a large creature standing next to the barn. The thing looked like it had fur all over its body. Its head was shaped more like a dog's than a man's, but it still stood upright on two legs. What really freaked me out, though, were its eyes. They glowed red even in the darkness. I watched this thing walk away from the barn towards the woods before turning back into the house. I went downstairs to tell my dad what I saw. "I think that whatever you saw earlier is back," I said worriedly. He didn't say anything right away, but just nodded his head, then walked upstairs to get dressed. Mom woke up after hearing us talking and came downstairs to find out what was happening. She wanted to call the police or somebody to help us deal with the situation. My father refused to let her do this because he didn't want anyone thinking we're crazy. Then he told both of us to go stay in the bedroom while he took care of the problem himself. We stayed there until we heard gunshots being fired outside. When everything was quiet again, we came down to check things out. Dad explained that he shot at the creature when it tried to attack him. According to him, it ran off into the woods, making strange noises along the way. He told us that he was going to go back out and make sure it wasn't coming back anytime soon. Mom wanted him to stay inside, but Dad insisted on doing this anyway. I remember being scared for my father's safety because I didn't know what we were dealing with here. Even though whatever this thing was had run off, it could still be lurking around somewhere, waiting for another chance at us. After what seemed like forever, Dad finally came back into the house. He looked tired, but relieved. "I don't think it'll be bothering us anymore," he said quietly, "but just in case, I'm going to sleep downstairs tonight." My mother protested, saying that she'd feel safer if we all stayed together upstairs. Dad refused to let her do this because he thought it was best to protect his family by keeping watch over them himself. So we went to bed after locking the doors and windows before getting some much-needed rest. We never saw or heard anything else strange after that night. Whatever attacked our farm must have been driven away permanently when my dad shot at it. This incident changed how I viewed the world around me from then on. For one thing, I realized there are things out there which can't always be explained by science or logic alone. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts, even if others think you're crazy. That's why I decided to share this story with everyone now, because I believe that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. My cousin and I were staying with my aunt for the summer in a small town in West Virginia. It was late June or early July of 2006. My cousin had lived there all his life, so he knew where everything was and how to get around. He also knew what kind of animals were native to the area. One evening, we decided to go on a hike into the woods behind our aunt's house. She lived on top of a hill, which could also be considered a mountain. We set out about an hour before sunset, which would have been between 8:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As we started walking up the dirt road that led into the woods, I remember hearing birds chirping and other forest sounds, but nothing seemed out of place or unusual at first. After walking up the road for about 10 minutes, my cousin suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, right next to me. I was following him closely. He looked off towards our left side, down over an embankment, and mentioned that he heard something. At first, I didn't know what he meant because it sounded like just regular forest sounds. Then, after listening more carefully, I heard it too. It sounded like something big was walking through dry leaves, with sticks breaking under its weight. We could see something paralleling us down below, but thick foliage hid it from view. As soon as we both realized what it might be, we were terrified. Then, without saying anything else, my cousin turned back around quickly. While doing so, he reached back with one hand, grabbed me by my shirt collar, and pulled me forward with him as he took off running at full speed. The trail ended at some sort of power line clearing or field, maybe half a mile away from where we began. Once there, we continued running until we stopped near some tall grasses along the edge, bordering the woods, where we started hearing whatever it was again. At this point, I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. My cousin said it was right over there and you could hear it. We both stood there, frozen in fear and disbelief, as we listened to these grunting noises coming from the edge of the woods, maybe 100 yards away. I remember looking at my cousin and asking what it was. He replied with a shaky voice, saying he didn't know, but that we should get out of there. We then ran back down towards our aunt's house, faster than before. As soon as we got inside her house, we told her what had happened. She didn't seem surprised or worried about it at all. She just mentioned that they had been seeing some strange things up on that mountain lately. This only made us more curious. So after dinner, when it got dark outside, we went back outside armed with flashlights to investigate further. This time, instead of taking the dirt road into the woods like before, we decided to go straight up behind her house. The terrain was much steeper and covered in thick brush and trees. We also brought along 2 large kitchen knives for protection, just in case something tried attacking us. We climbed up through the dense forest, using our flashlights to light our way, until we reached another clearing, similar to the one earlier, but smaller. Once again, we stopped near tall grasses along its edge, bordering the tree line, because we heard those same grunting sounds again, coming from within the trees, maybe 50 to 75 yards away. All 3 of us were standing still, completely silent, listening intently, when suddenly there came a loud crashing sound accompanied by an even louder grunt, almost directly across from where we were standing. At first, I thought maybe someone else might be walking around nearby, or perhaps it was a deer running off, but neither seemed likely, given the time of night and how close we were to the creature. My cousin said it was coming right at us and that we should run, and that's exactly what we did. We ran back down towards our aunt's house, faster than before. We didn't stop until we were safely inside. Once there, we locked all the doors and windows, then proceeded to tell her about what had happened. She said she had never heard anything like it before, but whatever it was must have been huge based on the sounds alone. After a while, we all went to bed, but none of us got much sleep that night. Every little noise outside seemed amplified tenfold. The next morning, after breakfast, my cousin and I decided to go out again, this time in daylight. We were armed with BB guns for protection, just in case something tried attacking us. We went back up into the woods behind our aunt's house, where we had been the night before. We walked around for a while, but didn't see or hear anything unusual, so eventually we decided to head back home. As we were leaving, I noticed some large footprints in the soft dirt near the edge of the trail leading out of the forest. I pointed them out to my cousin, who agreed they looked like human tracks, except much bigger, maybe 15 to 16 inches long by 6 to 7 inches wide, and deeper than what a normal person would make walking barefoot. He then suggested that maybe whatever it was last night had left those prints as evidence that something strange really did happen. I thought about this for a minute and realized he might be right. If someone wanted to hoax us, why not just dress up in a costume instead? Anyway, we followed these tracks until we reached another clearing, similar to the one earlier but smaller. Once there, we stopped again because we heard those same grunting sounds coming from within the trees, maybe 50 yards away. Now, mind you, all 3 of us were standing still, completely silent, listening intently, when suddenly there came a loud crashing sound accompanied by an even louder grunt, almost directly across from where we were standing. At first, I thought maybe someone else might be walking around nearby, or perhaps it was a deer running off, but neither seemed likely, given the time of day and how close we were to the creature. Anyway, thanks for hearing my story. In the summer of 2019, my girlfriend and I decided to go camping in West Virginia. We wanted to escape the city for a while and enjoy some solitude in nature. We had heard about some excellent campsites near the Monongahela National Forest, so we packed our gear and set off. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon and set up our tent. It was a beautiful spot right next to a river, surrounded by plenty of trees for shade. The weather was perfect, warm during the day and cool at night. After setting up camp, we went for a short hike along one of the trails near our site. The scenery was breathtaking, with lush green forests, crystal clear streams, and towering mountains all around us. When we returned to camp, it was starting to get dark, so we started a fire. We cooked dinner over the flames before settling down for the night. As I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of nature outside our tent, something caught my attention. I heard rustling noises coming from the nearby bushes or shrubs. My heart raced as I strained my ears, trying desperately to identify the source of the odd sound. The noise continued sporadically until it finally stopped, leaving nothing but silence once again. Suddenly, both my girlfriend and I widened our eyes when she turned towards me, saying she had heard something. I agreed. A few minutes later, the noise happened again, but much louder, followed by growls that made every hair stand on end. She asked in a loud whisper what it could be. Just then, another loud crash came from outside, sounding like someone had thrown large rocks against the nearby trees. Then everything went silent except for the crickets chirping softly in the distance. Feeling uneasy about going outside, I suggested we stay inside the tent until morning, when it would be safer. The next day, we woke up early and decided to explore more of the area around our campsite. We hiked along a trail that led deeper into the forest, hoping to see some wildlife or maybe even find a secluded spot for swimming in one of the crystal clear streams. As we walked further into the woods, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching us. Every now and then, my girlfriend would ask if I had heard something or what the noise was. I didn't want to scare her, so I reassured her that it was probably just an animal. However, deep down, I knew there was something more sinister lurking in those woods. After a few hours of hiking, we decided to turn back and head towards our campsite. We were both tired and hungry and wanted to get back before dark. As we approached the campsite, my girlfriend suddenly stopped. She pointed towards a large rock on the ground near our tent. This wasn't any ordinary rock. It had strange markings all over its surface, as if someone or something had carved them into it with sharp claws. I bent down for a closer inspection when she asked if it could be from an animal. That's when I noticed long scratch marks along one side and the bottom edge. They looked fresh, as if whatever made them might still be nearby. We quickly gathered our things and left as fast as possible. Upon reaching the car parked at the trailhead, my girlfriend expressed feeling watched throughout our entire hike. She also mentioned hearing odd noises coming from behind us as we walked through the forest. We drove straight home without stopping anywhere along the way, shaken up by what had happened and not wanting to take any chances. Upon our return, I immediately called the local ranger station to report our experience. The ranger on duty expressed concern and said he would send someone out to investigate. A few days later, a wildlife biologist from the State Department of Natural Resources contacted us. He was interested in our encounter and asked if we could meet him at his office for an interview. Some people believe these creatures are responsible for attacks on livestock at nearby farms. The biologist explained that they didn't have enough evidence yet to determine exactly what was happening, but assured us they were actively investigating the matter. In conclusion, I still can't explain everything that happened during those 2 nights spent camping near the Monongahela National Forest. But one thing is certain, something very unusual and terrifying occurred while we were alone in those woods, surrounded by nature itself. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. I was outside working and my wife called me to come see something strange that she had seen out by our goat pen. We have 6 goats, 4 females, and 2 males. I went over to where she was standing at the fence, looking into the pen. All of our goats were there except for one male whom we call Billy. He is an extremely large boar goat, about 300 pounds, and has long horns. We could not find him anywhere, so we thought he must be down in the woods below us. They like to eat leaves off of small trees when they can get away with it. About an hour later, Billy came walking up from down in the woods with his tail between his legs. This is unusual for him, as he usually walks around proud as a peacock. I did not think much more about it until Monday morning when I went out to feed them before work. When I got close enough to see inside their shed area, there were intestines laying everywhere. Part of what looked like half-eaten liver or heart meat was scattered around too. The first thing that crossed my mind was coyotes, but then again, maybe some dogs might have gotten hold of him somehow. But then, why would there be so many guts left behind? It just didn't make sense. After feeding them, I started searching through all their pens and sheds, trying to find any other remains, thinking maybe they had killed another animal somewhere else. But I found nothing else. My wife said that she heard barking late Sunday night, which sounded like several dogs fighting or attacking something very near our house. She said it lasted only about 5 minutes or so, then stopped abruptly. On Tuesday evening, after getting home from work, my wife met me at the door saying, "You are not going to believe this." When she told me what happened earlier while sitting on her swing set watching deer grazing across Route 50, I had to go see for myself. She said that she was watching the deer when she heard a loud thud and then something rolling down the hill behind her. When she turned around to look, there was Billy's head laying about 15 feet from where he must have rolled off of our front porch. His head is very large, with horns that are at least 2 feet long each. The skull area measures about 18 inches across, so it would take some force to knock his head clean off. When I went out on the porch, I could clearly see where he had been laying because the boards were wet from his blood. There was a trail of blood leading back to where he had rolled off the porch. There are no signs of any tracks in the area, only what appears to be scuff marks on the ground, about 6 feet from where his head is now lying. I'm not sure if this could have been done by some wild animal or maybe even another goat. I do know that it would take an extremely strong animal to rip his head off and roll him down a hill like that. He weighed at least 300 pounds and was very muscular, so whatever did this must have been equally as large and powerful. The goats seem fine, except for being a little more skittish than usual, but then again, they may just miss their friend too. We've heard rumors about Bigfoot sightings in our area before, but never gave them much thought until now. My friend and I were out exploring a new area when we got lost and couldn't find our way back to the road. As it was getting dark, we decided to camp for the night and head back home in the morning. I had brought my tent, so we set it up near a little stream that ran through the area. We also made a fire to keep warm throughout the night. As darkness fell, I began hearing noises from different directions around us. Some sounded like branches breaking, while others resembled rocks being thrown into the water behind us. At one point during the night, my friend heard something large walking towards our campsite. He turned on his flashlight and shone it towards the noise, but didn't see anything at first glance. After a while of sitting there talking about what could be making all these strange sounds, I noticed something moving by some trees along the creek. They were tall enough that someone or something could hide behind them without being easily seen. When I saw movement coming from those trees, I grabbed my friend's arm tightly as if to say, "Look." He followed my gaze toward the trees, and then he too saw whatever it was move away quickly from view. Right after that, another sound came from across the stream, more or less directly opposite where I had seen the movement. This time, instead of just sounding like footsteps crunching leaves, it sounded much heavier. It seemed like they were dragging a large stick or branch through the water as if to purposely make noise. It didn't seem natural at all, especially since whatever was making these sounds seemed very intelligent. Unable to take it anymore, my friend and I decided we had to leave immediately. We packed up our stuff as quickly as possible and started heading back towards the road. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a Bigfoot. My friend turned around when he heard me gasp, but by then the creature had already disappeared into the woods. We kept walking until we finally made it back to the road where our car was parked. We got inside, locked all the doors, and drove home as fast as we could. Once we got home, my friend called his dad, who is an avid hunter. He told him everything that had happened out there in the woods, including how he saw a Bigfoot watching us while leaving the area after camping overnight near a stream off Ivy Branch Road, not far outside Spencer City limits, West Virginia, during the summer month of June 2006. His father said, "Son, don't worry too much about what you think you've seen. Most likely, it wasn't anything more than just your imagination playing tricks on you. No one has ever proven the existence of any such creatures like Bigfoots yet. Even though many people have claimed to see them before throughout history, including recent years, the chances are good that nothing really bad will come from this experience, except maybe some sleepless nights for a while." But that didn't help much, knowing for a fact what I had seen with my own eyes the night before. I will never forget that night as long as I live. The sounds we heard and the sight of that Bigfoot are forever etched into my memory. I know what I saw was real, and it wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. That creature was there, watching us from a distance before finally disappearing into the woods.